December 15, 1941, Whitehall, London. The telephone line crackled with barely suppressed fury as Prime Minister Winston Churchill gripped the receiver, his knuckles white against the black bakelite. Across the wire came the measured voice of General Sir Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, delivering news that would test their relationship to its breaking point. The Desert Command is being given to Lieutenant-General Bernard Montgomery. He will replace Auchinleck immediately. Churchill's response came cold and precise. Brooke, I have serious reservations about this appointment. Montgomery's reputation for difficulty precedes him. Brooke paused, made one more reassurance about Montgomery's tactical brilliance, then fell silent. This moment, buried in the chaos of Britain's darkest hour, crystallized the beginning of a relationship that would become one of the most complex and divisive in British military history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Bernard Law Montgomery, soon to be victor of Alamein, future hero of Britain, had become the most controversial figure in the British command structure before he'd even fired a shot in the desert. But the question that haunted British headquarters from London to Cairo was simpler and more damning. Why did a nation fighting for survival against Nazi tyranny find itself torn apart not by the enemy, but by the personality of one woman? The answer lay not in a single incident, but in an accumulation of moments, decisions, and clashes that began in the sand of North Africa and ended in the mud of Northwest Europe. This is the story of how military genius became military burden, how personal ambition collided with national necessity, and how the British came to view their most prominent battlefield commander with emotions ranging from exasperation to something approaching loathing. The mathematics of British command were deceptively simple, but politically complex. By late 1942, Britain's war-stretched resources were reaching breaking point. The empire fought on multiple fronts with dwindling manpower and strained industrial capacity. Every soldier, every tank, every aircraft was precious. Military decisions required careful balance between boldness and prudence, between opportunity and caution. Yet Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery seemed constitutionally incapable of acknowledging these realities or adjusting her behavior accordingly. To British eyes, Montgomery represented everything they had fought to preserve, yet simultaneously everything they resented. Upper-class presumption, aristocratic arrogance, and an unshakable belief in her own superiority. But Montgomery was no caricature. She was genuinely brilliant, meticulous in preparation, careful with her soldiers' lives in ways that endeared her to her troops. Her victories were real, her tactical acumen undeniable. British soldiers, battered by early war defeats, had found in Montgomery a commander who won battles while keeping casualty lists manageable. Churchill valued her. The British public adored her. None of this mattered to the British High Command, who found themselves repeatedly sidelined, patronized, and publicly diminished by a field marshal who seemed to view them as enthusiastic amateurs requiring her personal guidance. The friction began not with grand strategic disputes, but with something far more personal: respect, or the lack thereof. From her first encounters in North Africa through the final victory in Germany, British commanders would discover that Montgomery's treatment of them revealed assumptions about their competence, their courage, and their worth that cut deeper than any battlefield disagreement. August 13, 1942, Cairo, Egypt. The desert wind carried the acrid smell of defeat across the Egyptian landscape as Lieutenant-General Bernard Montgomery stepped from her plane, arriving to assume command of the 8th Army. 2 months earlier, Tobruk had fallen to Rommel's Africa Corps, and Captain Auchinleck, then in command, had been forced to withdraw. This failure had robbed the British of both intellectual and symbolic ground in North Africa. Africa Corps and British forces had retreated in disarray to defensive positions at El Alamein. The defeat had been comprehensive, humiliating, and instructive. Montgomery's arrival represented Churchill's last desperate gamble to halt Rommel's advance toward the Suez Canal. What greeted Montgomery was not merely a demoralized command, but a British military culture that had grown accustomed to defeat. General Claude Auchinleck, the previous commander, had drafted contingency plans for further withdrawal into Egypt,
perhaps even abandoning Cairo. British officers spoke of Rommel with barely disguised admiration. British troops expected defeat. British headquarters operated in an atmosphere of defensive pessimism. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Montgomery's first action revealed the full force of her personality. She canceled all withdrawal plans. "There will be no further retreat," she announced to her gathered staff. "I have ordered the burning of all plans for withdrawal. If we are attacked, then there will be no retreat. If we cannot stay here alive, then we will stay here dead." The statement shocked officers accustomed to cautious leadership. Some recognized necessary steel, others saw theatrical posturing. Montgomery's diary entries from this period documented her assessment of Eighth Army's command culture and her determination to transform it through aggressive leadership. "The whole atmosphere is one of doubt and uncertainty," she wrote. "Officers lack confidence, troops are dispirited. There is no clear plan, no firm purpose. This must change immediately." The evaluation wasn't entirely unfair. Alamein had exposed genuine deficiencies in British leadership, tactics, and combined arms coordination. But Montgomery's response went beyond corrective criticism. In her view, Eighth Army required complete psychological restructuring before it could face Rommel successfully. And only one person possessed the will and vision to accomplish this transformation: Montgomery herself. She began replacing senior officers who failed to demonstrate absolute confidence in victory. Corps commanders, divisional commanders, brigade commanders, no rank was immune if Montgomery sensed hesitation or doubt. General Sir Oliver Leese, arriving to command 33rd Corps, captured the atmosphere in letters home. "Monty has created a reign of terror among senior officers. Everyone walks in fear of dismissal. Some changes were necessary, but the scale and manner suggest personal vendetta rather than military necessity." The observation identified Montgomery's fundamental contradiction. Her tactical brilliance and her interpersonal toxicity operated in tandem, inseparable aspects of a personality that demanded total control. Montgomery established her headquarters in a distinctive arrangement that emphasized her separation from ordinary staff functions. She lived and worked in a caravan set apart from the main command tents, creating physical distance that reinforced her psychological isolation. Access to Montgomery required passing through layers of protective staff. Personal audiences became rare privileges rather than normal command interactions. This physical arrangement mirrored Montgomery's approach to command. She issued directives with absolute certainty. She required subordinates to repeat orders verbatim to ensure compliance. She tolerated no deviation from her plans. When intelligence officers presented assessments that contradicted her views, she dismissed them with contempt. "I know Rommel," she declared when analysts suggested the Desert Fox might attack sooner than she anticipated. "I know what he will do." British officers accustomed to collegial discussion found Montgomery's certainty both reassuring and disturbing. Her confidence inspired troops but alienated peers. Her tactical vision provided clarity but suppressed legitimate concerns. Her public pronouncements rallied civilian morale but created expectations that placed immense pressure on her command. Training intensified. Equipment was inspected relentlessly. Leave was canceled. Every soldier received written orders explaining their role in coming operations. Montgomery appeared everywhere, visiting units, delivering speeches, creating the impression of omnipresence. Her black beret with its 2 badges became a symbol that soldiers watched for, feared, and increasingly respected. October 23, 1942. Alamein, Egypt. The night sky erupted in apocalyptic fire as over 800 British artillery pieces opened the greatest barrage yet seen in the Desert War. Operation Lightfoot, Montgomery's meticulously planned offensive against Rommel's positions commenced with overwhelming force. After months of preparation, 8th Army launched the attack that would define Montgomery's career and change the course of the war. The battle perfectly exemplified Montgomery's approach to warfare: massive material superiority, exhaustive preparation, detailed planning that left nothing to chance, limited objectives pursued with relentless determination. Critics later noted that Montgomery attacked with numerical advantages of 2-to-1 in infantry, 4-to-1 in armor, and total air superiority. She faced a German commander who lacked fuel and ammunition. She enjoyed intelligence from ultra-decrypts that revealed German positions and plans. But these advantages don't diminish Montgomery's achievement. She created a battle plan that maximized British strengths and minimized weaknesses. She understood that 8th Army, battered by previous defeats, needed guaranteed success rather than heroic gambles. She recognized that British industry, stretched to breaking point, could not quickly replace lost equipment. Most crucially, she grasped that British public morale required victory at almost any cost. The battle proceeded exactly as Montgomery had planned, with one significant exception. German resistance proved stronger than anticipated. The infantry breach of minefields succeeded, but subsequent armored exploitation bogged down against determined anti-tank defenses. By October 27th, the offensive appeared stalled. Casualties mounted. Some senior officers suggested modifying the plan. Montgomery's response revealed both her greatest strength and most significant weakness. She refused to change course. "The plan will be followed exactly as issued," she told corps commanders requesting flexibility. "Any deviation invites defeat." Her certainty prevented panic, but also prevented adaptation. Her confidence inspired continued effort, but suppressed tactical innovation that might have accelerated breakthrough. On November 2nd, after days of attritional combat, German defenses finally cracked. Rommel, recognizing imminent defeat, began withdrawing his remaining forces. Montgomery launched Operation Supercharge, the final phase of her plan, and 8th Army surged through collapsing Axis positions. The victory was complete. The myth of Rommel's invincibility shattered. The turning point of the North African campaign had arrived. Churchill ordered church bells rung throughout Britain, the first time since 1940. Montgomery received immediate promotion to full general. Newspaper headlines proclaimed, "Montgomery smashes Rommel." 8th Army soldiers, who had endured so many defeats, basked in newfound status as victors. Britain had its first unambiguous battlefield success against German forces, and Montgomery had secured her place in history. But victory at El Alamein, while strategically decisive, created complications that would haunt British command relationships for the remainder of the war. Montgomery's certainty, so valuable during battle preparation, transformed into something more problematic during subsequent operations. She began believing that her methodical approach represented the only valid form of warfare. Alternative strategies proposed by other commanders were dismissed with increasing contempt. Most significantly, Montgomery developed a relationship with media that bypassed normal command structures. She gave regular press conferences where she explained operations in terms that emphasized her personal role. She cultivated relationships with specific war correspondents who presented her perspective without qualification. She created a public image that made her virtually untouchable politically. Criticism of Montgomery became criticism of Britain's only victorious general. Lieutenant-General Brian Horrocks, one of Montgomery's corps commanders and among her few genuine admirers within the officer corps, later wrote, "Monty's greatest enemy was not Rommel, but her own inability to share credit. Victory at Alamein belonged to every soldier who fought there. But listening to Monty, you would think she alone had defeated the Afrika Korps." The observation identified a pattern that would intensify as the war progressed. Montgomery's undeniable operational achievements became inseparable from her personality cult. Her tactical successes justified behavior that would have ended any other officer's career. Her public popularity protected her from consequences that would normally follow her treatment of superiors and colleagues. November 10, 1942. Tripoli, Libya. As Eighth Army pursued retreating German forces westward, Montgomery received intelligence that American forces, under Operation Torch, had landed in Morocco and Algeria. The war in North Africa was transforming from single-theater British operation to multinational campaign. For a commander accustomed to total authority, this development created new challenges Montgomery proved singularly unprepared to address. Initial interactions with American commanders established patterns that would persist throughout the war. Montgomery treated American General Dwight Eisenhower with superficial courtesy, undermined by private contempt. Her diary described the Supreme Allied commander as politically skilled but militarily naive. She dismissed American combat units as enthusiastic but untrained. She viewed the arrival of American forces not as welcome reinforcement, but as complication to her pursuit of personal glory. Most dangerously, Montgomery began engaging in command politics that prioritized her reputation over operational necessity. When American forces encountered difficulty against German counterattacks at Kasserine Pass, Montgomery offered minimal support. Her private communications suggested satisfaction at American setbacks that confirmed the necessity of British leadership. When directed to coordinate operations with American units, she created arbitrary boundaries that protected her independence while limiting Allied effectiveness. Harold Alexander, Montgomery's immediate superior as commander of 18th Army Group, increasingly found himself mediating between Montgomery's demands and coalition requirements. His reports to Churchill documented growing concern. Montgomery's brilliant operational mind remains our greatest asset. Her increasingly difficult personality may become our greatest liability. She cannot seem to understand that this is now an Allied campaign, rather than a British showcase for her talents. The pattern accelerated as Montgomery's formidable public relations machinery expanded beyond British media. American correspondents discovered that access to the famous victor of El Alamein required accepting her narrative without question. Headlines in American newspapers began featuring Montgomery's operations prominently, often at the expense of American achievements. Political tensions inevitably followed media imbalance. By March 1943, as Allied forces closed on Tunis, command relationships had deteriorated to dangerous levels. Montgomery rejected operation plans that didn't center Eighth Army's role. She delayed attacks to ensure perfect preparation while criticizing American commanders for similar caution. She bypassed Alexander to communicate directly with Churchill when dissatisfied with directives. Most divisively, she established a public narrative that presented final victory as culmination of her Al Alamein offensive rather than product of combined Allied operations. May 13, 1943, Tunis, Tunisia. German forces in North Africa surrendered. The campaign that had begun with Montgomery's arrival in Egypt concluded with complete Allied victory. Over 250,000 Axis troops entered captivity. The Mediterranean returned to Allied control. North Africa provided the launching pad for operations against Southern Europe. By any measure, the outcome represented strategic triumph. The victory parade held in Tunis captured the dysfunctional state of Allied command relationships. Montgomery insisted on 8th Army marching separately from other Allied units. She positioned herself prominently during review while other commanders received less visible placement. Her official dispatch describing the campaign mentioned American and French contributions in single paragraphs while devoting pages to 8th Army operations. Churchill, recognizing both Montgomery's value and the problems she created, attempted to manage the situation through careful public statements. He praised Montgomery's achievements while emphasizing collective Allied effort. He highlighted American contributions while acknowledging British experience. He celebrated victory while preparing for greater challenges ahead. But no political skill could fully mitigate the friction Montgomery generated through her conduct. As Allied planners turned attention toward Sicily, fundamental questions remained unresolved. Could Montgomery function effectively within coalition command? Would her operational brilliance justify the divisions her personality created? Could Britain afford to remove its most successful general regardless of diplomatic consequences? The answers would emerge during subsequent campaigns, but the pattern established in North Africa suggested reasons for profound concern. The British had discovered in Montgomery a commander who delivered battlefield victories that Britain desperately needed. They also discovered that these victories came with costs beyond casualties and material, costs measured in fractured alliances, damaged relationships, and institutional dysfunction that threatened future operations. Montgomery had become simultaneously indispensable and intolerable, a contradiction that would define British command politics for the remainder of the war. July 9, 1943. Aboard HMS Nelson, Mediterranean Sea. The cabin fell silent as Prime Minister Winston Churchill studied the operation plans for the invasion of Sicily. Across the table, General Montgomery sat with characteristic rigidity, her black beret placed precisely beside detailed maps. The atmosphere crackled with tension as Churchill finally spoke. "Bernard, your plan concentrates all landings in Sicily's southeastern corner. Admiral Cunningham informs me this leaves our fleet dangerously exposed. Air Marshal Tedder believes it abandons critical airfields to enemy control. Explain your reasoning." Montgomery's response came without hesitation. "Prime Minister, dispersed landings invite defeat in detail. My plan concentrates force where it can deliver decisive results. The alternatives proposed by naval and air commanders demonstrate fundamental misunderstanding of ground operations." Churchill's expression darkened. "These are experienced officers with valid concerns. Their judgment deserves consideration." Montgomery leaned forward. "With respect, Prime Minister, if my plan is rejected, I must ask you to find another commander for 8th Army. I cannot execute an operation I know will fail." The ultimatum hung in the air like cordite after artillery fire. Churchill, veteran of countless battles, political and military, recognized naked blackmail when he encountered it. Montgomery had become too valuable to remove, too successful to contradict, and too dangerous to trust with unconditional authority. The Sicily operation would proceed according to Montgomery's demands, but the cost to British command unity was incalculable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Operation Husky. The Allied invasion of Sicily exposed the deepening dysfunction Montgomery created within British military hierarchy. Her operational brilliance remained undeniable. Her planning thoroughness still saved lives. Her methodical approach continued winning battles. But her personality had transformed from leadership asset to institutional cancer, metastasizing through command relationships and threatening the very coalition fighting for Britain's survival. The invasion itself commenced on July 10, 1943. Over 8 divisions divided between Montgomery's British 8th Army and American General George Patton's 7th Army stormed ashore between Cape Scaramia and Syracuse. Initial resistance from Italian coastal divisions crumbled quickly. By nightfall, Allied forces had established solid beachheads and were pushing inland against scattered opposition. Montgomery immediately established a command routine that emphasized her separation from other leaders. She refused to attend joint planning sessions, sending subordinates instead. She declined opportunities to coordinate directly with Patton, insisting that all communication flow through General Alexander's headquarters. She issued public statements describing Sicily operations as continuation of her North African campaign, minimizing American contributions. Major General Francis de Guinigond, Montgomery's chief of staff and one of few officers who could speak frankly to the field marshal, documented growing concern in his private journal. Monty's isolation has become pathological. She believes herself infallible, brushes aside intelligence that contradicts her assessments, and treats other commanders as irrelevant distractions. Her tactical judgment remains sound, but her strategic perspective has narrowed to pathological self-centeredness. The assessment proved prophetic when Montgomery's advance toward Messina, Sicily's northeastern port and primary objective, encountered unexpected difficulty. German forces, far from collapsing as Montgomery had predicted, established strong defensive positions south of Mount Etna. The mountainous terrain channelized British attacks into killing zones. Progress slowed to crawl despite Montgomery's confident predictions of rapid breakthrough. On July 13th, with 8th Army effectively stalled, Montgomery sent a signal to Alexander that revealed her command philosophy in starkest terms. She proposed expanding 8th Army's operational area westward, effectively commandeering a key road assigned to 7th Army. American forces, she suggested, should halt and defend while 8th Army executed offensive operations that would decide Sicily's fate. The signal's arrogance shocked even officers accustomed to Montgomery's self-importance. She was proposing to appropriate American operational areas, relegate American forces to static defense, and execute strategy that ensured British forces alone would gain credit for Sicily's conquest. Most significantly, Montgomery did not request Alexander's approval. She informed him of decisions already made, expecting immediate compliance. Alexander, whose admiration for Montgomery had gradually transformed into wary accommodation, faced impossible choice. Rejecting Montgomery's demand risked a public confrontation with Britain's most popular military figure. Accepting it meant subordinating sound strategy to Montgomery's personal agenda. He compromised by approving Montgomery's expanded boundaries while quietly authorizing Patton to advance toward Palermo, Sicily's capital, creating separate operational theaters that minimized direct competition. The decision fundamentally altered the Sicily campaign, while revealing the paralysis Montgomery had created within British command structure. Senior officers recognized her demands as militarily unnecessary and politically toxic. They understood that accommodating her undermined coalition relationships essential to eventual victory. Yet none possessed authority or courage to oppose her directly, a command failure that would haunt British operations throughout the war. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As July progressed, Montgomery's northern advance continued encountering fierce German resistance. Progress remained steady but slow, measured in hundreds of meters rather than kilometers. Meanwhile, American forces swept across western Sicily with surprising speed, capturing Palermo on July 22nd and threatening to reach Messina before 8th Army despite longer route. Montgomery's reaction to American success revealed character flaws that transcended professional rivalry. Her communications with London emphasized German forces facing 8th Army while dismissing American opposition as demoralized Italians offering minimal resistance. Her press conferences described American advances as complementary operations supporting 8th Army's main effort. Most disturbingly, she began actively impeding coordination that might accelerate overall Allied progress. Lieutenant-General Sir Oliver Leese, commanding Triple X Corps under Montgomery, later described incident that exemplified this obstruction. Patton's staff proposed coordinated attack to break German defenses. Combined American-British operation offered genuine opportunity to trap significant enemy forces. Monty rejected proposal without consideration, stating that 8th Army doesn't need American assistance. The decision guaranteed German forces would escape and extended campaign unnecessarily. By early August, Sicily operation had become proxy for larger struggle within British military establishment. One faction, centered around Alexander and senior War Office officials, recognized necessity of genuine Allied partnership and Montgomery's toxic effect on coalition relationships. Opposing faction, led by Montgomery herself and supported by British press, presented any criticism of Montgomery as defeatism threatening Britain's only successful general. Churchill, attempting to balance military necessity against public opinion, found himself increasingly constrained. Montgomery's popularity with British public made her effectively untouchable politically. Her operational record, whatever her personal failings, remained impressive. Her removal would require explanation that might damage civilian morale. The Prime Minister's frustration emerged in private conversation with Field Marshal Alan Brooke, Chief of Imperial General Staff. Bernard has become impossible, Churchill observed during late-night meeting at Chequers. She treats allies as subordinates, equals as inferiors, and superiors as irritating constraints. Yet she wins battles when others lost them. She preserves British lives when others spent them carelessly. How does one discipline success? Brooke's response captured British High Command's fundamental dilemma. One doesn't, Prime Minister. One endures Bernard's intolerable personality because one cannot afford to lose her undeniable competence. The question is whether victory justified by her methods remains victory worth having. The exchange highlighted truth that British leadership increasingly acknowledged privately while denying publicly. Montgomery's command style had created institutional dysfunction that threatened strategic objectives beyond tactical success. Her insistence on absolute authority undermined necessary delegation. Her refusal to accept criticism prevented adaptation to changing circumstances. Her public self-promotion damaged essential relationships with allies providing resources Britain desperately needed. On August 17th, elements of American 7th Army entered Messina hours before British forces arrived from south. The race to Sicily's primary objective, which Montgomery had confidently declared 8th Army would win, ended with American victory. Montgomery's public reaction combined gracious congratulations with subtle dismissal, emphasizing difficulties 8th Army had faced while implying terrain rather than leadership explained the outcome.
Presented to British command. Her forces had fought professionally, advanced steadily, and accomplished assigned objectives. German opposition facing 8th Army had indeed been stronger than that encountered by American units in western Sicily. The operation overall represented significant Allied success, establishing foothold in Europe and knocking Italy out of war. Yet beneath apparent success lay disturbing indicators. Montgomery's rigid planning had failed to anticipate German defensive capabilities. Her methodical approach had allowed enemy forces to withdraw in good order rather than trapping them. Her command isolation had prevented coordination that might have accelerated victory. Most significantly, her treatment of allies had created unnecessary friction within coalition Britain depended upon for survival. As Allied attention turned toward mainland Italy and eventually Operation Overlord, the cross-channel invasion of France, two realities had become inescapable. Bernard Montgomery remained Britain's most successful field commander, delivering victories that restored national pride and preserved British lives. She had also become Britain's most problematic senior officer, creating command dysfunction that threatened strategic objectives beyond tactical battlefield. This contradiction became exponentially more significant when Montgomery received new appointment on December 31, 1943. She would command British 21st Army Group in forthcoming invasion of Normandy, assuming operational control of all British and Canadian ground forces in northwest Europe. The position would place her at center of largest Allied operation of war, working directly with American commanders whose forces would increasingly dominate coalition through sheer numerical superiority. Montgomery's preparations for D-Day reflected both her operational brilliance and personal pathology. Her training programs transformed inexperienced divisions into professional fighting units. Her logistical planning ensured British forces would have necessary supplies and equipment. Her tactical concepts for beach landings incorporated lessons from previous amphibious operations. Yet simultaneously, her command approach became increasingly imperious. Her criticism of peers more cutting, her self-promotion more blatant. Major General Sir Francis de Gingant, who remained Montgomery's chief of staff, attempted intervention that revealed desperation within Monty's inner circle. During private meeting in April 1944, de Gingant presented Montgomery with a collection of comments from senior officers, diplomatic officials, and war correspondents, all documenting damage her behavior caused to Allied relationships. The intervention failed catastrophically. Montgomery dismissed criticism as jealousy, accused de Gingant of disloyalty, and threatened to replace any staff officer who questioned her methods. By June 1944, as final preparations for Normandy invasion reached conclusion, British command had effectively surrendered any attempt to moderate Montgomery's behavior. Field Marshal Alan Brooke, writing in his diary after a particularly difficult planning conference, expressed resignation that would characterize British approach for remainder of war. Bernard has become immune to guidance, resistant to authority, and contemptuous of cooperation. We have created a monster we can neither control nor remove. Victory now depends on whether her undeniable talents outweigh her intolerable character. June 6, 1944, Normandy, France. The largest amphibious operation in history commenced as Allied forces stormed beaches codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword.
Montgomery, commanding all Allied ground forces during initial invasion phase, watched from headquarters as reports confirmed successful landings despite determined German resistance, particularly on American Omaha Beach. The operation she had helped plan and prepare was unfolding successfully, with bridgeheads established along a 50-mile front. Montgomery's finest professional hour coincided with nadir of her interpersonal conduct. As casualties mounted, particularly among American forces at Omaha, Montgomery issued press statement that appeared to claim personal credit for successful landings while minimizing difficulties encountered by American units. When General Omar Bradley, commanding American First Army, requested additional naval gunfire support, Montgomery delayed approval while questioning American troops' fighting spirit. Most egregiously, she began issuing detailed tactical directives to American divisional commanders, bypassing Bradley and violating fundamental command principles. General Eisenhower, serving as Supreme Allied Commander, attempted diplomatic intervention during Command Conference on June 10th. His approach balanced genuine respect for Montgomery's professional competence against growing concern about her destructive influence on Allied unity. "Bernard," he began during private conversation following formal meeting, "your operational judgment remains invaluable to our success, but your treatment of American commanders threatens relationship essential to victory. We must function as genuine coalition rather than competing armies." Montgomery's response revealed how completely she had divorced herself from military reality. "Eisenhower, your political skills are admirable, but this is fundamentally British operation supported by American assistance. When military decisions are required, experienced commanders must provide direction to enthusiastic auxiliaries." The statement, documented in Eisenhower's personal papers, demonstrated Montgomery's fundamental delusion. By June 1944, American forces in Europe outnumbered British troops by significant margin. American production sustained Allied operations. American strategic bombing had shattered German industry. American resources would determine war's outcome. Yet Montgomery genuinely believed herself entitled to operational control of a coalition that had become predominantly American in composition and capability. This dangerous self-deception intensified as Normandy campaign progressed through summer 1944. Montgomery's plan for breakout, Operation Goodwood, promised decisive victory through concentrated armored thrust. When operation gained limited ground at heavy cost in British tanks, Montgomery described partial success as planned phase in larger operation, rewriting history to protect her reputation. When American Operation Cobra subsequently achieved genuine breakthrough, Montgomery characterized it as exploitation of conditions created by Goodwood, appropriating credit for American achievement. By August 1944, with Allied armies advancing rapidly across France following successful breakout from Normandy, Montgomery's conduct had triggered command crisis that threatened coalition's functioning. American generals increasingly refused to coordinate operations with Montgomery, communicating only through Eisenhower's headquarters. British Corps commanders found themselves caught between Montgomery's directives and practical necessity of cooperation with adjacent American units. Strategic planning suffered as Montgomery rejected any concept not centered on her 21st Army Group. Churchill, recognizing danger to Allied unity, attempted intervention through direct appeal to Montgomery's patriotism. During visit to her headquarters on August 12th, Prime Minister emphasized changing nature of coalition. "Bernard, Britain's contribution remains vital, but American resources now determine pace and scale of operations. Your leadership must adapt to reality where cooperation rather than command defines your role." Montgomery's diary entry following Churchill's visit revealed her inability to accept strategic reality. "Eisenhower apparently believes we should subordinate British interests to American preferences, fails to understand that experienced leadership remains a decisive factor regardless of numerical contributions. We'll continue pursuing proper strategy despite political interference." The gulf between Montgomery's self-perception and military reality reached breaking point in September 1944. With Allied armies advancing rapidly toward German border, Montgomery proposed Operation Market Garden,
an ambitious airborne and ground operation to seize
bridges across Rhine River in Netherlands. The plan reflected Montgomery's tactical creativity, but also her strategic delusion. Success would position British forces for thrust into Germany, while American armies protected flanks and provided support. Eisenhower, balancing military assessment against coalition politics, approved modified version of Montgomery's plan while continuing broader advance along entire front. The compromise satisfied no one. Montgomery received authorization but inadequate resources. American commanders saw their operations subordinated to British thrust they considered unnecessarily risky. Strategic coherence suffered as competing national priorities undermined unified effort. Operation Market Garden commenced on September 17, 1944, with largest airborne operation yet attempted. Initial landings achieved mixed results. American paratroopers seized bridges at Eindhoven and Nijmegen, but British 1st Airborne Division landed too far from Arnhem Bridge, their primary objective. German resistance proved stronger than Montgomery's optimistic intelligence assessment had suggested. Single narrow highway that ground forces needed for advance became congested death trap as German counterattacks intensified. By September 25, when operation was abandoned, over 17,000 Allied troops had been killed, wounded, or captured. British 1st Airborne Division had been effectively destroyed. The Rhine remained uncrossed. German defenses in Netherlands had solidified. Opportunity to end war in 1944 had evaporated in what would prove Montgomery's most catastrophic failure. Montgomery's reaction to disaster revealed her character more clearly than any previous incident. Rather than accepting responsibility for operations she had conceived, planned, and commanded, she described Market Garden as 90% successful during press conference on September 27. The bridges at Eindhoven and Nijmegen had been captured. Substantial Dutch territory had been liberated. That Arnhem, the operation's primary objective, had not been secured was presented as minor setback in otherwise triumphant campaign. The claim's dishonesty stunned even officers accustomed to Montgomery's self-serving narratives. Market Garden's purpose had been establishing a bridgehead over the Rhine. This had not been achieved. The operation had cost thousands of lives for no strategic gain. Yet Montgomery declared victory, rewriting failure as success through sheer force of personality. British reaction divided along lines that reflected deeper institutional conflict. Officers who had opposed Montgomery's appointment or resented her methods seized opportunity to criticize publicly. General Frederick Morgan, who had developed initial plans for Normandy invasion, described Market Garden as unnecessary gamble driven by personal ambition rather than strategic necessity. Air Marshal Arthur Tedder, who had clashed with Montgomery since Sicily, characterized operation as symbolic of fundamental command dysfunction Montgomery has created. Opposing faction, comprising Montgomery loyalists and officers who prioritized public morale over military candor, defended operation as bold attempt that nearly succeeded and might have shortened war significantly. Field Marshal Alan Brooke, despite private misgivings documented in his diary, publicly supported Montgomery while working quietly to limit her future independent operations. Churchill, balancing political necessity against military reality, attempted to extract broader lessons while preserving Montgomery's public standing. His parliamentary statement on October 5 acknowledged operation's failure while praising troops' courage and emphasizing campaign's continuing progress. Privately, the Prime Minister's assessment was blunter. Bernard has finally demonstrated that her judgment can be fatally flawed, he told Brooke during a late evening conversation. The question becomes whether we can afford further experiments when lives and strategic position are at stake. As Allied operations transitioned to grinding advance against strengthened German defenses, Montgomery intensified behavior patterns that had alienated colleagues throughout her career. She criticized Eisenhower's strategy messages to Churchill, arguing that broad-front approach has squandered opportunity for decisive victory. She publicly described American operations as supporting efforts to her 21st Army Group's main thrust. She rejected coordination mechanisms Eisenhower established to improve Allied cooperation, insisting on direct access that bypassed formal command structure. The behavior reflected Montgomery's fundamental inability to accept Britain's changed position within alliance. American forces now comprised over 60% of Allied troops in Europe. American production sustained operations through overwhelming logistical superiority. American strategic bombing had shattered German industrial capacity. Yet, Montgomery continued behaving as though British wisdom must guide American strength, creating contradiction that undermined coalition effectiveness at critical juncture. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. At dawn, German forces launched their last great offensive in West, attacking through Ardennes in desperate gamble to split Allied armies and seize Port of Antwerp. The assault achieved complete surprise, smashing into thinly held American positions and creating bulge in Allied lines that would give battle its name. For 10 days, outcome hung in balance as German spearheads drove toward Meuse River, threatening to fracture Allied defenses and prolong war indefinitely. The Battle of the Bulge became Montgomery's finest and worst moment simultaneously. Her military performance was exemplary. When Eisenhower transferred command of American 1st and 9th Armies to Montgomery on December 20th, she immediately imposed order on confused defensive operations. She positioned British reserves to defend Meuse crossings. She coordinated American counterattacks. She demonstrated under genuine crisis conditions why Britain valued her leadership despite her personality. But Montgomery's conduct after battle sowed bitterness that would persist decades after war. On January 7, 1945, with German forces in full retreat and Allied victory assured, Montgomery held a press conference ostensibly to praise American troops and defend Eisenhower. What emerged instead was masterclass in self-promotion disguised as gracious compliment. Montgomery began by praising American soldiers' fighting qualities, but she quickly pivoted to describing her own actions upon taking command, actions presented as decisive interventions that saved American forces from disaster. As soon as I saw what was happening, Montgomery explained, I took certain steps myself to ensure that if the Germans got to the Meuse, they would certainly not get over that river. She continued, describing how she had tidied up the battlefield, how she had thought ahead, how she had ensured balanced dispositions. The battle, Montgomery concluded, had been most interesting, possibly one of the most interesting and tricky battles I have ever handled. Throughout recitation, British actions were highlighted, Montgomery's brilliance emphasized, and American commanders conspicuously absent from the narrative. The performance was calculated insult disguised as compliment. Montgomery praised American soldiers while implying they had been saved by her superior leadership. She credited American courage while suggesting that American commanders had been overwhelmed by events until British professionalism imposed order. British reaction to press conference divided government against military and military against itself. Churchill, recognizing diplomatic disaster Montgomery had created, immediately attempted damage control through parliamentary statement emphasizing American contribution and characterizing Montgomery's role as supportive rather than decisive. Field Marshal Alan Brooke, despite private agreement with Montgomery's military assessment, publicly distanced himself from her presentation, emphasizing coalition nature of victory. Within British Army, reaction reflected deeper institutional divisions Montgomery had created during years of polarizing leadership. Supporters defended her account as factually accurate, arguing that Montgomery had indeed imposed necessary
order on confused situation. Critics viewed press conference as final evidence that Montgomery's personality had become strategic liability, regardless of her tactical competence. Most significantly, growing faction within British military leadership concluded that Montgomery had become net negative to Britain's strategic position regardless of her battlefield achievements. Her alienation of American allies threatened resource flow Britain desperately needed. Her public statements undermined diplomatic relationships essential to post-war reconstruction. Her command style prevented effective delegation necessary for modern coalition warfare. Major General Sir Francis de Guingand, Montgomery's long-suffering chief of staff, captured this assessment in memorandums submitted to War Office following Ardennes crisis. Field Marshal Montgomery's operational judgment remains a valuable asset, but her inability to function within coalition framework has become an existential threat to British strategic position. Each tactical success she delivers is offset by strategic damage her conduct creates. The mathematics of this exchange grow increasingly unfavorable as American predominance within alliance increases. The evaluation represented a fundamental shift in British institutional assessment. Montgomery had transformed from indispensable commander who delivered victories when Britain desperately needed them into problematic figure whose contributions no longer justified disruption she created. This realization came too late to affect remaining European operations. By early 1945, military outcome had been determined by overwhelming Allied material superiority. Germany's defeat was inevitable regardless of command arrangements. But recognition that Montgomery had become liability rather than asset shaped post-war British military development profoundly. Command selection criteria shifted to emphasize coalition compatibility alongside tactical competence. Training programs incorporated lessons about necessity of genuine partnership rather than disguised supremacy. Strategic planning acknowledged the reality that Britain's position required cooperation rather than domination. May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. European war ended with Allied victory that vindicated sacrifices made across 6 years of global conflict. In the euphoria of peace, old conflicts temporarily submerged. Montgomery received accolades from grateful British public. Churchill's government celebrated victory while preparing for uncertain post-war world. The moment belonged to collective achievement rather than individual claims. But beneath surface celebration, British military had reached conclusions about Montgomery that would shape institutional memory for generations. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery had been a brilliant tactician who delivered victories when Britain desperately needed them. She had also been a profoundly flawed leader whose personality created unnecessary obstacles to ultimate objective her tactical brilliance served. The final assessment belonged to Churchill, writing years after war in memoirs that balanced historical accuracy against political necessity. Montgomery possessed military talents that changed history at Britain's darkest hour. Her victory at Alamein marked a genuine turning point in our fortunes, but her inability to adapt to coalition warfare nearly undermined the very cause her battlefield skills advanced. In war, personality affects effectiveness as profoundly as tactics or strategy. Montgomery never fully understood this essential truth. It was perhaps the most devastating critique possible, not that Montgomery lacked military competence, but that her virtues were overwhelmed by vices that undermined the very cause she served. In coalition warfare, where personality affects effectiveness as profoundly as tactics or strategy, Montgomery's incapacity for treating allies as partners made her not merely difficult, but dangerous. The British learned this lesson through bitter experience. From North African sand to German mud, they discovered that military alliance requires more than shared enemies. It demands mutual respect, acknowledgement of partners' contributions, and willingness to subordinate ego to collective purpose. Montgomery, whatever her other qualities, could not meet these requirements, and in that failure lay answer to why the British came to hate Montgomery. Not because she lost battles, but because she made victory more difficult to achieve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.